Hey guys, it's Miss Landry, and today we're going to talk about something called cell cycle checkpoints. And your body is pretty amazing. So if you recall from the last video, we have the cell cycle. And the first phase, if you remember, is called gap 1. Then you have your S phase, the synthesis phase, in which DNA is replicated. You have your gap 2 phase. And then finally, you have the M phase, which is mitosis. Now, what will happen is your body has certain checkpoints throughout this cycle in which it double checks to make sure that everything looks okay, because if it doesn't, then you don't want to duplicate that cell. So let's talk about the first checkpoint. The first checkpoint is called the G1 checkpoint. And basically what it's checking is to see if the DNA is looking good, making sure there's not too many, too much damage to the DNA, and making sure that they have everything they need in order to move on. So if everything looks good at the G1 checkpoint, the cell can move on and it's given the go-ahead. So it gets the green light. Right? Go ahead, you can keep going in this cycle. So then it moves into the S phase. There are no checks in the S phase because DNA replication, let me write that on there, has its own, I guess you could call it like an editing tool. And when we go into what DNA replication looks like, you'll see that the DNA polymerase, which is the enzyme that creates the new DNA, also acts as an editor, so it can tell if it's made mistakes. So the next checkpoint is actually the G2 checkpoint. So we'll put it right here, G2 checkpoint. And what this checks for is to make sure that we have enough DNA. So has the DNA been copied correctly? We need to make sure that everything that we need in the cell is enough to be able to move on to mitosis. For example, if you don't have enough of a certain organelle, it's going to stop the division at that point and kind of just check to make sure that we have everything we need. And then the final checkpoint, if this is good, it gets the green light, move ahead. And then the final checkpoint is right here in mitosis. And this happens before cytokinesis. So I'll put before cytokinesis. And basically, and we haven't really talked yet about something called spindle fibers, but there's these fibers that form in the dividing cell. So if I draw a cell like this, and this is where those chromosomes connect to the spindle fiber in order to be pulled apart. So you can kind of think of them as like bungee cords, like they're going to pull those chromosomes in two different directions to create two cells. So the M checks to make sure that the spindle fibers have connected properly to each chromosome, so that when it divides, it will actually divide correctly. And if the spindle fibers look like everything is good, it will get the green light and it will go ahead and divide into the two daughter cells. Now, if any of these checkpoints, if the cell bypasses the checkpoint when they shouldn't, we get what we call cancer. And cancer is defined as uncontrolled cell division, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Uncontrolled cell division is basically cells that divide regardless of their checkpoints. So even if after this first checkpoint, we find like the cell might have some symptoms that it shouldn't go on, but for some reason it does. And we're going to learn what those reasons are. We're going to learn about some different ways that cancer happens. Now, if at this checkpoint we find that it does need to stop, it goes into something called G0 or G0. And G0 is it's what we call a senescent stage. And I'll spell that for you, senescence. I think that's right. Basically, the cell goes to sleep almost. It still is doing some biochemical processes, but it is not growing. No growth. And that pause in growth allows the cell to kind of check and see what's going wrong, and it will either fix it, or if it can't fix it, it goes into something called apoptosis. Now, some people also call this apoptosis. I've learned it as apoptosis. And this is basically programmed cell death. And the cell will signal itself that there is just too much damage and it should not be dividing. And so it will go through into this programmed cell death and basically recycle all its parts. So that's it for the control of the cell cycle. In the next video, we will go over all of the cancer cells. Thanks, guys.